1998 and 1997, 1998, and they studied terrorism, catastrophic terrorism, what the United States should do if catastrophic terrorism comes to us. And they said, in the very beginning of this article, they say, this is in, of course, CFR magazine, Council of Foreign Relations, Foreign Affairs, read by all the intelligentsia and wannabe intelligentsia. And they imagined the transforming event. They're imagining that event that will change America, that will change our history. And then what we would do when that happens. Well, 2 years later it happened. Here are the men that wrote it. And Ashton Carter's in the top left, John Deutsch is in the middle. Ashton Carter and John Deutsch were, at that time, senior partners of a company called Global Technology Partners, LLC. Global Technology Partners is an exclusive affiliate of Rothschild North America, formed to make acquisitions of and investments in, basically, military spending. Ashton Carter, who's now our Secretary of Defense, it should be noted, has spent his entire career as an agent of the Rothschilds, which means that the United States Secretary of Defense is basically a disciple of the Rothschild family. Now that should concern us because the Rothschilds are not an American family. They're a private enterprise with a lot of money, and they have a very specific agenda that is not necessarily, can be compliant with ours in America's best interests. As you see, the war on terror, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, there is no American national interest in any of these wars. Yet we're being bled dry fighting them. The Project for the New American Century. In September 2000, a year before 9/11 happened, this organization, which is another Zionist Neocon group, headed by the Kagan family, Donald Kagan, Robert, Fred, they put out this paper called Rebuilding America's Defenses, in which they called for basically American military supremacy in the whole world. And they said, this is what we should aspire for, this is what we should go to, and in this they laid out some of the main points. And one of the main points that they said was the United States should invade Afghanistan and occupy that, we should invade Iraq and occupy Iraq on the long term, and the question of Saddam Hussein was not important. They said the United States needs to occupy Iraq whether Saddam Hussein is on the throne or not. So Saddam Hussein was not the real issue. It was the purpose was that Iraq was the most advanced, powerful Arab state in the Middle East, and we needed to occupy it. And they said in the process of this transformation of the U.S. military into this global dominant force in the Middle East and around the world, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like the new Pearl Harbor. So here you have all these Zionist think tanks calling for a catastrophic event that will change America and put us on the fast track for global dominance, or what they see as global dominance. And of course, that new Pearl Harbor was 9/11. And again, Ehud Barak, the first person to speak, to interpret this was Ehud Barak, who said it's now time to launch an operational concrete war against terror. George Bush then read directly from that Zionist script. He said that, of course, on 9/11, he said that our way of life and our very freedom was under attack. And he said on 9/11, he said America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world. So these Al-Qaeda people obviously hadn't heard of Switzerland, which is a lot closer. They could have gone there and done this and saved us all the grief. September 20, 2001, Bush declared the war on terror. That's when he started, this is the war on terror. And he said, every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you're with us or you're with the terrorists. And there you see Mr. Byrd and the pedophile from Illinois applauding this. Now, the latest phase is ISIS. ISIS is the latest twist in this war on terror. And, of course, they do all kinds of terrible things and do them usually on videos and put the videos on YouTube about crucifying people and putting people in acid and doing every kind of imaginable thing they can. It's almost like a bad Batman comic strip or something. What's interesting about this group is that they make these videos, but when you see the characters in these videos, their faces are always covered with ski masks, with black masks. Now, why are they covering their faces like this all the time? Because they're obviously not Iraqi, they're not Syrian, they're not locals. something like 25,000 of the members of this group are all paid mercenaries, highly paid mercenaries, paid by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, oil funds. And they come from all over the place. They come from Chechnya, they come from Indonesia, they come from Africa. They're basically riffraff. They're people who have been either kicked out of prisons and said that you got a choice. You can stay in prison here, or you can go and fight with ISIS. They choose that. And the leader, of course, the al-Baghdadi guy in the front, he was the graduate of Camp Bucca. This is interesting because all of the videos that come to us about ISIS come to us from an Israeli intelligence website called SITE Intelligence Group, based in Bethesda, Maryland. It's headed by a woman named Rita Katz. She's a Mossad agent. This is Rita Katz up there. She's an Iraqi-born Israeli. And with one of the videos a few years ago, it was a second beheading of an American video. Her organization sent the video to her subscribers. She has a subscriber list, includes CNN, NBC, BBC. She sent it to subscribers the video before it had been released by the actual bad guys. And she said, she described this little problem on CNN. She said, and in fact, within a short time after our release of the video, ISIS account on social media indicated that within a short time they would be releasing the video. Only we actually had that video beforehand and were able to beat them with the release. Now, how is it this little Israeli website, this Israeli intelligence operation in Bethesda, Maryland, had a copy beforehand and was able to release it before the bad guys had even released it? Well, this shows you who's the alpha dog in this situation. This is an Israeli intelligence operation pretending to be an Arab operation. This is the oldest trick in the book. Here we have ISIS versus the United States. This is the New York Post. This is the Orlando attack. And again, we have Netanyahu speaking out. I mean, how many world leaders go out and make a video about their impression of what happened in Orlando? Well, Netanyahu is speaking very gravely. He speaking from his office in Israel. He said, this week's shooting wasn't merely an attack on the LGBT community. It was an attack on all of us. Now listen for how he conflates this with Israel. He says, it was an attack on all of us, on our common values of freedom and diversity and choice. Radical Islamist terror makes no distinction between shades of infidel. This week it was gays in Orlando. A few days before it was Jews in Tel Aviv. All of us are targets, and working together, we will defeat them even faster. See, this is all this, we're in it together, guys, right? This is all, we're in it together. They're attacking us for the same reason they're attacking you, and vice versa. Now, this is our Foreign Minister, Secretary of State, John Forbes Kerry. And when you listen to him speak about Syria, he sounds like he's the guy making the decisions. He doesn't sound like he's a third party looking at and trying to solve this crisis. Listen to what he says. He said in May of 2016. He said, if Assad's strategy is to somehow think he's going to just carve out Aleppo, the biggest city in Syria, and carve out a section of the country, I got news for you and for him. This war doesn't end. As long as Assad is there, democratic elected president of the country, the opposition is not going to stop fighting him one way or the other. Well, this gives you an idea. Who's calling the shots in this war? It's not these guys in the field. It's this guy who's giving them all the weapons and the money. It's exactly like they did in Afghanistan. It's Afghanistan redo. They're doing the same thing. This is giving you an idea of the cost, $1.7 trillion and how they've spent that money in the military wars. Now, the cover-up of 9/11. The 9/11 cover-up is the most essential part of the deception that enables the culprits, the bad guys, to dupe the American public into supporting the global war on terror, the goal of the 9/11 terror atrocity. Without the deception of 9/11, there would be no war on terror. That's why it's so important to understand the deception, because as long as this nation is deceived about what happened on 9/11, we are enslaved to the war agenda. And the only way we can get out of this war agenda is understand we've been deceived. That's why you all, and the people who understand this, are actually the leaders. Because you've come to an understanding that 90% of the population has not come to yet. And it's our obligation to help our fellow Americans and humanity. As Mr. Nixon said, President Nixon, he said, it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. Because the cover-up is where you're exposed. You cannot cover up a crime without being seen, because you've got to do the job. You've got to name it. It's obvious. That's where you get caught. So there are three crucial control elements of a false flag cover-up. False flags, when you do an operation, you do some sort of criminal attack on another country, and you wave a third flag, like, hey, it's us, it's us. No, it's you're doing it under disguise. You're pretending to be somebody else as you commit the crime. So the first thing you have to do is control the investigation and access to the evidence, because obviously in a proper investigation, a proper criminal investigation will reveal what happened. 9/11 was never investigated as a crime. Not at all. Secondly, you have to control the interpretation, how the event is explained to the public. So what does the newspaper tell you? What does CNN tell you? That's the interpretation. And thirdly, you have to control the litigation in order to prevent legal discovery. That's the court cases that follow, whatever wrongful death cases or investigations that go to the court. So the first thing I'll talk about is the controlled investigation of 9/11, or the non-investigation. The non-investigation was headed by, of course, the Department of Justice, because it fell in the Department of Justice lap to be investigated. John Ashcroft, the politician from Missouri who lost an election to a dead man, was the boss. He's the figurehead, but the active member of the party was, of course, Michael Chertoff, the Israeli dual national, and he was given the file, the portfolio, to investigate 9/11 and to prosecute whatever crimes would be prosecuted. That was his job. Rather than investigate it, what they said is, what the government said, this was not a crime. This was an act of war, and therefore we will go to war against those 19 Arabs and wherever they came from. So that's how they got themselves out of this. So rather than investigate the crime, John Ashcroft oversaw, and Michael Chertoff oversaw, the destruction of the evidence, 24/7. And they said, now we have to clean up the mess so Wall Street can get back in business and people can go shopping again. That was the whole push. And after he served that time as the Assistant Attorney General, he then became the head of Homeland Security. And what's important to understand here is that in this position, Michael Chertoff, the son of the Mossad, his mother was a Mossad agent from Elizabeth, New Jersey. She was actually born in Czechoslovakia. She was one of the first Mossad agents. Thank you. And in this position, he was able to control all access to the evidence of 9/11 for about 7 years, because he maintained that power as Homeland Security Czar. And the people that wrote the 9/11 Commission, because there was no investigation of 9/11, we were given an ersatz product, the 9/11 Commission report, and we were told this is America's investigation. Of course, it took them like 2 years to even start the Commission report, and then they put some political guys in power to do it, all headed by Executive Director Philip Zelikow. But the people who worked on the commission themselves, after they worked on it, came out and said it was a complete cover-up. This is the senior counsel from New Jersey. His name is John Farmer, and he's talking about the 9/11 Commission. He said, what government and military officials told Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what when was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. This is straight from the horse's mouth. Thomas Keane was one of the co-chairmen, and he said, to this day we don't know why NORAD told us what they told us. It was just so far from the truth. And 6 of the 10 administrators on the 9/11 Commission have said the same thing. This is the man that wrote the myth. This is the man who actually wrote the report. His name is Philip Zelikow. His thesis that he wrote at Rice University in Texas was on the creation and maintenance of the public myth. And then he went and created his own. And this 9/11 Commission report is basically the essential myth in book form. He completed the outline of the 9/11 Commission report even before the staff began working. Another man involved in the cover-up was these lower people. This is the man that oversaw the investigation that became known as the Building Performance Study Reports. This is where they studied what happened to the World Trade Center up until the point of collapse. And I called him up, and here he is looking at the steel at the World Trade Center, and I asked him, Mr. Corley, he's a steel guy. I mean, he's not a steel guy, he's a concrete guy from Skokie, Illinois. And I said, Mr. Corley, are you examining the steel at the World Trade Center for any evidence of explosives? And he said, I don't know anything about such tests. I'm not a metallurgist. So why was he put in power? Why was he put in charge of the investigation of a steel frame building? Probably for the same reason he was put in charge of the investigation in Waco, Texas, and Oklahoma City. Because he is very good at providing a kind of a cover story, a narrative, or a document to bolster the government's version. Yes, we did. He's passed away of cancer, so he's not around to talk anymore. Here's another white paper, another cover-up. This is the final report on the collapse of the World Trade Center. So this is supposed to be, this came out in October 2005. This is supposed to give the people and media an explanation why the towers fell, the Twin Towers. And it was written by the NIST, which is part of the Department of Commerce. And the director of NIST at that time was this man, William Jeffrey, who happens to be an expert on advanced weapons technologies for the United States government. He was brought in to write this report, to oversee the release of this report in 2005. And this is another report where they completely failed to examine the steel or dust for any evidence of explosions. After he wrote that report and did his work at NIST, he went on to head SRI International, stands for Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. And it's a research and development organization that produces novel energetic materials. These are explosives, nanotechnology, for the U.S. military. That's his specialty. Yet he oversaw an investigation where that was that was one of the things that was used to destroy the World Trade Center. They didn't even look for it. His specialty is making them. And at SRI, where they develop these things for the military, the person who runs the laboratory where they make these things is an Israeli guy. And the man on the top right, his name is Yigal Dov Blum, and Mr. Blum has been working at SRI developing nanotechnology and energetic materials since 1984. So this is not new stuff. It's been around for a while. Now, of course, a very important person in the cover-up of the non-investigation is the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg. He served 12 years, unprecedented, 3 terms. They rewrote the law to allow him to run for a 3rd term. And here he is in Christmas 2008 visiting his good friend Ehud Barak. And he's visiting Ehud Barak at the time when Israel was bombing Gaza. The operation was called Operation Cast Lead. But it was casting more than lead, it was casting white phosphorus. They were dropping white phosphorus artillery shells and bombs on the people of Gaza. Now the thing about white phosphorus, it's a banned weapon. It's not supposed to be used. Because when it falls on a person, when burning white phosphorus hits you, it burns right through your skin and bone until it falls off the other side. You look like Swiss cheese. Because nothing will stop it. You can't pour water on it. Nothing will extinguish it. So, it's completely banned. And Israel was launching these things. You could see that when you look at the footage, because CNN would show these, and these look like jellyfish. They fall like jellyfish. The phosphorus just falls on people like that. But of course, the mayor of New York didn't find any problem with that. And he's a big friend with Mr. Netanyahu as well. He's very close to the leadership of Israel. And here's Mr. Netanyahu when he came to ground zero, and they looked at this is 10 years after, and Mr. Netanyahu wanted to see the names of the 4 Israelis who died on 9/11. Their names are engraved there. There were 4. 4 Israelis died.
Right.
And although there were 4,000 who were expected to have been, who were thought to have been by their families in the area of the World Trade Center or the Pentagon on 9/11, 4,000. Of the 4,000 that were thought to be in the area, 4 were unlucky enough to have been actually killed. Now the interpretation of 9/11. This is essential because the media is what informs us of the world. We don't know what's going on in Afghanistan. We hear about it from the media. We only draw a visual idea of what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq from what we read or what we hear from the news. So you control the interpretation, you control the people. And this is done, this is a good example of how it's done. This is Rupert Murdoch runs News Corp, and Fox News. He was created by the Rothschild family in Australia. The Rothschild family bankrolled him in his first acquisitions in Australia. It so happens that Mr. Murdoch is his mother's an Orthodox Jew, which by Israeli law makes him also Jewish. And Mr. Rothschild has bankrolled him. So Mr. Murdoch came to this country like in the early 80s and mid-80s and started taking over media properties left and right. And I happened to ski with him one day in Aspen, Colorado. I was a ski guide, and I skied him back down to the restaurant, back down to the ski place, and I talked to him a little bit because at that time he was buying up properties left and right. The question is, how did he buy the Chicago Sun-Times and WTTW and all these media properties? It's like, how was he able to buy the properties that Americans used to own? And, well, with Rothschild money. Why do the Rothschilds do this? Because they want to control public opinion. So that's why we have this consolidation of media. So that, for example, when the United States went to war in Iraq in 2003, Mr. Murdoch owned 160 newspapers in this country. And every single one of the editors of those 160 newspapers supported his idea that the United States should go into Iraq and wage war in Iraq, which was clearly a war crime. But all the newspaper editors of his newspapers agreed with him, that's what we should do. That's why consolidation of the media is dangerous. Here's the New York Times, 3 years after 9/11. A very interesting comment. The lead editorial of the New York Times, September 11, 2004. The public knowledge of 9/11. The public knowledge. Think about that. What does that mean, the public knowledge of 9/11? They say, in the 3 years since 9/11, we've begun to understand that it's possible to know what happened without knowing what happened. How Orwellian can you get? Huh? Then they say, some of what we need to know publicly, again, what we need to know publicly, has been provided by the report of the 9/11 Commission. Other answers are lacking. And they left it at that. Now you have to understand that the mainstream media, the media in this country, did nothing of an investigation in 9/11. That makes no sense. In a properly functioning democratic republic, the media is supposed to be an estate unto itself, and it's supposed to investigate the government. It's supposed to put pressure on the government. When the government is doing something wrong, expose it. If the media doesn't do that, you do not have a democratic system. The media is the essential equalizer between the people and the government. And when the media falls down, the democracy falls down. Like this building that fell down. This is Larry Silverstein's 47-story World Trade Center 7. Fell down at 5:23 in the afternoon on 9/11. Not a single explanation why that happened. It's the first time in history. And this building wasn't even hit by a plane. The previous towers, the other Tower 1 and Tower 2, have been hit by a plane at least. This one just fell. So Larry Silverstein's third building goes down. And the final part of the interpretation is what I call the legacy. You know, like you have in New York City, you have the Holocaust Museum. It's meant to like memorialize the Holocaust and to teach people about what happened in World War II. Here at Ground Zero, Israelis have created a memorial. And the person who designed it is actually a close friend of Mr. Netanyahu. The World Trade Center memorial, the fountains and all that, was designed by an Israeli named Michael Arad. And Michael Arad, if you remember Moshe Arad, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, the guy who was born in Romania, that's his son. And these are close friends of Netanyahu. So here you see that the part that's carved in stone, the memorial is carved in stone for school kids to go and visit this weekend, for example, is created by an Israeli. So at every single point, from the ideation, through the planning, through the setting up, through the carrying out, through all aspects of the cover-up, all the way to the legacy, at every single point you have an Israeli agent, either an Israeli himself or an American Jew who supports the Israeli mission. So we're told that the 9/11 was done by Saudi Arabia. Well, why would Israelis be working so hard to protect Saudi Arabia? Or it's done by the German death cult. I think that's what Alex Jones said. Well, why would the Israelis be working so hard to protect the German death cult? Well, if you don't believe the official version of 9/11, you're in good company. You're actually in the majority. You might not feel like that out here at the garden party and being kicked out of venue after venue in Massachusetts, but you are in fact the majority. And people who are trying to stop this message from reaching other people are like the boy holding his finger in the dike. It's not going to work. The dam is broken, the water's over the top, and people who try to hold that in are going to get swept away. Because the truth, like Shakespeare said, will out. You cannot hide murder forever. So here we see the basic graph, that 60% of American people do not believe the official account, and at most 40% do. Control of the 9/11 litigation. This is the real serious thing where there were 3,000 people who had wrongful death cases having lost loved ones on 9/11. And all 3,000 families were not allowed to go to court and have any legal discovery and find out who was responsible for the loss of their loved one. All 3,000 families have been shut down. And that was done by this man, Alvin K. Hellerstein. He's a U.S. District Judge for the Lower Manhattan. And his the problem with him is that he was the one who oversaw the tort litigation, 9/11 tort litigation. There was a serious conflict of interest, which I discovered. And I made this very openly, publicly known. I contacted relatives and lawyers and people, that this man had a fundamental primary family conflict of interest in that his son in Israel was a lawyer for a company that represented the key defendant in the 9/11 tort litigation. That was an Israeli company, Mossad company called ICTS, International Consultants on Targeted Security. NV, based in Holland, run by the Mossad, and former guys from El Al Security. And they're the ones who provided airport security at Boston, at Newark, and Dulles, and many other places. They owned the company called Huntley USA, which did the passenger screening at Boston Logan that day, which is why they were in the docket, because they needed to explain how these 19 Arabs got on the plane with box cutters and whatever they got on with. Well, I couldn't get anybody to do anything about this conflict of interest. This is the essence of it. His son, here at the top, Joseph, works for an Israeli law firm called Amit, Polak, and Matalon, who represents the Rothschild company, who owns ICTS. So there again, you see, the Rothschilds having all this money, and they are involved in a lot of stuff, but they're usually like 1 or 2 steps removed from the actual crime.
Yep.
So you don't see it unless you look at like who's the parent company, and who's the parent company of that one. And there you see, there's the Rothschilds, the Rothschild group. Well, that was the conflict of interest. And these are the people that dished out the money. The first 2,900 families basically just took the government compensation money and went home. And whatever Mr. Feinberg decided to give him, he's the special master of the 9/11 Compensation Fund. Now again, here we have, he was appointed by John Ashcroft, and his wife, who worked with him in this delivery of the compensation money, is an executive member of the UJ, the United Israel Appeal and Jewish Federation of Washington. She's also a member of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency. A Jewish Agency is the highest agency of the Zionist enterprise in the United States, in the world. So, you know, I'm showing that only to show you that these people all seem to have this connection to the state of Israel. And Sheila Birnbaum was the lady that dealt with the 96 families that held out. There were about 100 families that held out. They wanted their day in court. And one by one, those families were shot down until there was no one left standing. And that's where we are today. So 9/11 has never gone to court. The worst terror atrocity America's ever suffered, and it'll never have its day in court unless there's a revolution. And another lawyer that played a key role in the 9/11 cover-up is this man. His name is Michael Mukasey. He and Hellerstein go to the same Orthodox congregation in Manhattan. It's called Kehilat Jeshurun. And Mukasey presided over the 1993 case, the bombing of the World Trade Center. Now that's important because that was the event that was supposed to prime the mind of the American people that Arabs were trying to break down the World Trade Center. So they made movies and things. They had TV shows where, you know, at the end they show the shackled terrorist being driven through the streets of Manhattan. He looks up, he sees the Twin Towers. He says, next time we'll get them both. You know? And this is shown on TV. So oh God, those Arabs are trying to take on the World Trade Center. So then when it happens, you say, well, yeah, that guy did it from the taxi, right? It was that Arab terrorist. They did it. It's like so that they prime it in such a way that for most people, it's the conclusion you come to yourself. And of course the Arabs did it. Who else? And this guy also oversaw the legal case between Larry Silverstein and the insurance companies, in which Larry Silverstein, having put down $100 million of borrowed money, won more than $7 billion. So the question is, what are they covering up? The answer is that the government and controlled media are suppressing 9/11 evidence, like Mr. Bloomberg in New York has done. They're suppressing 9/11 evidence that would expose the official myth as a pack of lies in order to protect the real culprits from being identified. After 9/11 happened, I was writing about 9/11, you know, from day one. We happened to be in New York City early in the morning on 9/11, and I was writing about it and pointing out all of the obviously false things that the government was telling us. But the government, I could see, was going to war based on this falsehood, based on this false narrative. And I said, how safe is it for me to be sitting in my little house in Schaumburg, Illinois, writing about the lies of this cover-up and the lies of 9/11 when the government's going to war? I said, that can't be very prudent. So we relocated. I relocated to Germany, and right away I started interviewing some people. I had a journalist friend over there who put me in touch with these former heads of German intelligence, and one of them, he told me it looked like a Hollywood production. You know, he said it looked like a Hollywood production. And this man Wertebach told me, former head of this Verfassungsschutz, he told me the deathly precision and the magnitude of planning behind the attacks would have needed years of planning. Just like that Mr. Johnson said, this is way more sophisticated than you think. He said, you know, such a sophisticated operation would require the fixed frame of a state intelligence organization, not a loose group of terrorists like Mohammed Atta. There's no way they could do that. And then I met this man. This is on the first day I got to Germany. I met this guy. His name is Andreas von Bülow. He used to be a parliamentarian who oversaw German intelligence funding. And he told me there are 3 levels of such an operation like 9/11. There's the architectural level, the architects who design it. There's the managerial level, the guys who manage it, and then there's the working level, which is part of the deception, like the 19 Arabs. The architectural level is the guys who designed the crime and want it to be blamed on those guys in order that public opinion will be turned against those guys. And 9/11, of course, was done to turn our opinion against Islam, Muslims, Arabs, Middle East, the whole thing. To get us to go along with this idea that we have to save our nation, let's go to war against Islam, which is where we've been. And he said that 95% of the work of intelligence agencies around the world is deception and disinformation, which is widely propagated in the mainstream media, creating an accepted version of events. He said journalists don't even raise the simplest questions. Those who differ are labeled as crazy. So I've been labeled as in that crazy part for like the last 15 years. 15 of the 19 hijackers lived in Florida. And these are the 19 alleged hijackers. 15 lived in Florida, where many of them had been issued duplicate licenses. And many had reported having lost passports. You need to understand what's going on here. When somebody like Mohammed Atta gets a driver's license in Florida on Wednesday, and then somebody calls in on Thursday and say, hello, I'm Mohammed Atta. I just moved to a new apartment. Can you send me a new license to my new address? And the DMV did it. So then you have 2 people with the same name going around leaving a trail in Mohammed Atta's name. And this is an operation this is a kind of tactic that is employed by the Mossad, has been used for a long time, and it's very well described in this book called The Little Drummer Girl, which was written by Israeli intelligence with John Le Carre. And in this book, Diane Keaton in the movie plays the role of this English actress who pals up with a Palestinian guy, and then she travels across Europe, leaving a false trail for a Palestinian terrorist who is then implicated in a terrorist attack in Germany, which has actually been done by the Israelis. So the Israelis blow up a synagogue, but he's blamed for it. And I mean, this is not a new tactic. And in this book, the Mossadnik says to Diane Keaton, terror is theater. Theater's a con trick. You know what that means? Con trick? You've been deceived. Now, I always urge people to keep that in mind. Keep that part, terror is theater, in mind. Next time you turn on the TV and see there's been a terrible shooting or a bombing or something. Anyway, because you have to understand that most of what is happening under the name of terrorism today is false flag. Like what happened in Orlando, what happened in San Bernardino, what happened in Paris. In San Bernardino, a very good example. The people who were in San Bernardino, the people who saw the shooters were interviewed by